Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville, with 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to another episode of Mike's on Mike. I'm Mike Miller here in the studio. My colleagues Mike Tolbert and Mike Hightower are both in their remote locations, and we're delighted to have you with us today. In the last several weeks, the Jacksonville City Council has been reviewing Mayor Deegan's 24-25 $1.9 billion budget. When she proposed the budget, the mayor had said she wanted to make investments that deliver the best return for our citizens. Today, we want to get into that and the status of the budget, and find out just what the council has already agreed to, what we think they're going to agree to, and what they may not agree to. Our guest to help us get through all of that is David Bauerlein, once again, the outstanding and prolific reporter for the Florida Times-Union. And we believe we were talking about this before we started the show, but we think this is your fourth time here?
I think that's right, Mike.
So this is going to become like a Saturday Night Live, and you're going to get a jacket after you've been on for 15 years or something of that sort. Anyhow, David's extensive beat has always been Jacksonville City Hall plus the independent agencies. I remember him well when I worked at JTA, and he was always trying to dig information out of me that I tried not to give him, but I gave up on it and did anyhow. But besides that, one of the things more contemporary is that David was very essential in bringing us the JEA story, and we are very grateful for the work that you put into that. Thank you very much. And welcome back for the fourth time to Mike's on Mike.
Thank you very much, Mike and Mike. Always a pleasure to be here and talking to you guys about the business of City Hall.
Because among the four of us, you are the only one that knows what they're talking about. So
we just make it up as we go along.
You're right. Mr. Talbert, kick it off for us, please.
Yeah, David, thanks for coming back again. And before we get into the budget discussion, I want to ask you about a recent article you wrote that the city may back away from its foreclosure lawsuit against the developer owner of the Laura Street Trio. Feels like we've been suffering with the Laura Street Trio now for decades. What in the hell is this all about? What's going on now?
Yeah, it's really follow the bouncing ball in terms of it's on again, it's off again, on again, off again, on again. So I think the change is that Steve Atkins, who owns the Laura Street Trio, has got a new financial partner in the founder of Live Oak Contracting. And I think that's a change in terms of the money that can be brought to the table. So given that they have this new amount of funding available privately, they want to reopen negotiations with the city. And they still would like a deal in terms of Steve Atkins with Southeast Development Corporation and also the Live Oak Contracting. So I think there's always been a desire to get a deal really on both sides. It was just they couldn't get one done after a repeated series of negotiations, and you can assign blame however you want on that. But the idea is that if they do want to have some more negotiations, which it seems like both sides do, given that there's this change in terms of the ownership structure of the Laura Street Trio, they would want to be able to do that without having a foreclosure lawsuit hanging over the proceedings. So everyone feels confident that maybe it's a matter of weeks, not months or years, that they can have some deal that can actually come up for a vote before City Council. We've heard that before, as you well know, Mike, but, could it be different this time? If it is, it's because you have a new investment partner at the table and a real desire on the part of some City Council members to get a deal done, as well as I think Mayor Deegan would really like to see that trio restored.
Let me follow up just for a second here and ask, with that new influx of funding, is that going to mean that Atkins will be putting in less of his own money, or will it mean that the city will put in less of the money we plan to appropriate towards it?
Yeah, the idea would be the city would have to put in less money because there would be less of a gap to close in terms of being able to make it financially viable. And there could be some changes, too, in terms of the structure of how the money is the timing of it maybe, or who controls the funding as it goes in. That was a big, I get too far in the weeds, that was a big sticking point in the previous negotiations.
Who is it? So in essence, is Atkins is sharing the partnership or sharing the ownership? Is that what this is?
the way it's described to me is you can think of it like a joint venture. I don't think that's all, as I understand that everything's been actually ironed out in terms of exactly how that ownership partnership is formulated in a legal way. But yes, he's taken on a partner. It's not just so he's got somebody who's lending him money. He has a partner now on this, an equity partner who is able to bring its own money and also bring in other lenders. So to that extent, that's good news for the Laura Street Trio's prospects for being redeveloped. But look, it's still going to be a lot of city money involved, I think, in this. And that could be that could cause some council members to say, it's just too much.
Let's get on to the budget. David, let's start with the tutorial. Remind us of what Mayor Deegan has proposed in mid-July for the budget, and where are we, and when will the council vote?
Yeah, great questions, Mike. So basically, the big picture look is there's no property tax rate increase. That's going to stay the same. No increases in tax and fees, so those are going to stay the same. The city has been benefiting from a really strong real estate economy, so there's more money coming into the city from just keeping the millage rate where it is, the tax rate where it is. So when Mayor Deegan made her budget address, she proposed a budget that, as Mike was saying, was right about $1.9 billion, actually $1.92 billion. And the council's finance committee has gone through that, and through extensive budget reviews, they have reduced that to $1.88 billion. So it's about $40 million less than what the mayor's proposal was. Mayor Deegan had proposed using $47 million from the council's operating reserve, from the city's operating reserves, to make it a balanced budget. The city council finance committee really balked at the idea of going into the operating reserves to that amount. So they're at about $7 million is what they would use out of the operating reserves in order to balance the budget. So in that's the broad shape of where things are. And then it becomes a question, well, what did they cut? And they did cut some funding that the mayor had proposed for affordable housing and for taking on homelessness. And so those are things that still could have some council members try to get that money back in. There will be a final vote on the budget the final Tuesday of this month, which I think is the 27th
or something. Yeah.
And that's when the city council will vote up or down on it and make any last-minute budget amendments.
24th, you're right.
Yeah, David, I want to ask. I know that the mayor her budget was $165 million more than last year, but given what you just said, what seemed to be the bone of contention there was that she wanted to use $47 million out of operational reserve. Correct? Now, so before we get into this, so we put this into correct context, given what we have now in operational reserves, are we not talking about in excess of $325 million plus another $125 for emergency, which of course is one of the reasons why Fitch gave us a 2-point increase in our rating. So what they did is I think the expression was they're trying to save taxpayer money. The two issues that they've taken out is homelessness and affordable housing. So those are, I guess they're saying, are not things that Jacksonville needs.
Yeah, the argument from the finance committee that they would make is that the amount of money in the operating reserves is enough to cover about 2 months of operating expenses for the city. And they're arguing that's where it should be. Mayor Deegan is arguing that the operating reserves are far above what is required of the city. And, why just stockpile money? There's needs out there. Let's use that money today rather than stockpiling it. And And yes, since the place where, a lot of the things that the mayor proposed did get approved by City Council's Finance Committee. I mean, there's a big increase in there for University of Florida Health. There's going to be big pay raises for sheriff, for police officers, firefighters, and corrections officers, including big jumps in starting pay. That's going to get through City Council. The idea of using city dollars for an affordable housing program, they said no to that. So that is where some of the friction point has been. Exactly right, Mike. And it's a question of, do you take that money out of reserves and argue that does have a payoff down the line, or are you basically sort of taking away the ability of the city to respond in the future if and when, as we all know it will, this real estate market cools off, and instead of housing prices going through the roof, they start to go down, and then you have the tax base doesn't grow the way it has. I mean, one reason there's so much money in the reserve funds is it's just been a gusher of property tax money coming into the city because of these huge increases.
There have also been a lot of federal dollars that have come into the city, too, which frees up a lot of local money that doesn't need to be used. So doesn't that then roll into the operating reserves as well?
It could. Yeah, exactly. So, it's and that federal money is basically run out.
Right.
I mean, there's really very little left that's still to be spent.
Yep.
David, Mike Tolbert talked about this, I think, a couple of shows ago, but whatever money from last year's budget is not used, my understanding is that if it is not used or spent in the fiscal year that is proposed, then it rolls back into reserves. Is this not correct? And my understanding is somewhere between $20 and $30 million is going to roll back in before October 1.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the amount of that is, but that's exactly how it works. I mean, you have a budget, it's an estimate for what you're going to spend, and almost every year the city ends up spending less than it's budgeted. And then that amount just rolls back into the reserve fund. So that could be an argument is, well, we've got this money that we can count on coming in each year. Mm-hmm. And that gives us a cushion to be able to go into the reserves because we know it's going to get replenished.
And if I'm not mistaken, is the $10 million that they have pulled out for affordable housing was going to be matched with another $30 million from the Community Foundation. So there was $30 million that was, quote, left on the table that they could use, plus the money that's not going to be used in the previous year that's going back. So is that fiscally responsibility? Is that just political gamesmanship and partisan sniping?
It's, could it be all of the above?
Yeah.
Politics is policy, policy is politics. I mean, the city's used to reserve. It's gone into reserves in the past, and it's been over the last decade about $9 million a year. And the mayor comes and says, well, we want to do $47 million out of reserves this year. And the council says no. And, presumably the mayor could come back and say, well, I'll agree to cut this amount of my budget, or could have come back with a budget that didn't require taking $47 million out of reserves and still did $10 million for this housing trust fund.
Or I'll tell you what, we'll take the $1 million per district that was going to be in this proposal, that each of you 14 district council members were going to receive, and we'll use that money for the affordable housing program and take it from there. No net loss, right?
Right. I think what will happen is the $10 million isn't going to be in the budget that gets voted on at the end of the month. But the council has said, if you want to do it, bring back a separate piece of legislation later. At that point, if the reserves have grown to a certain amount, maybe there's an argument you can make, look, we have even more reserves than even you have said we need. Mm-hmm. And so it's financially sound to take that $10 million out of the reserves.
To get into the weeds on that, will this money then go below the line, or is it going to be cut from the budget? Because that's a big difference. If it goes below the line, it's still there. You just can't spend it until you get it. It's a pay-go kind of thing. But if it's actually taken out of the budget, of course, then you've got to start from scratch.
Yeah, it's a cut. It's not in the budget at all. It's not below the line.
One of the other proposals, of course, from the mayor is that she is committed to putting 40 new police officers on the JSO and also another $28 million for fire stations. Is it safe to say that those two items are sacrosanct when it comes to that?
Yeah. Yeah, those are definitely going through, the public safety will have a very good budget this year.
I figure so.
Yeah, I want to go back to the reserves just a minute. Correct me if I'm wrong, David, but on the $10 million for affordable housing, that was being approached as a loan so that it would eventually be repaid to the city. And then you had the $30 million from the Community Foundation to match the 10. Am I correct on that?
That was the idea, right, that there would be this true public-private partnership between the city and nonprofit. And then the argument was that it would actually grow over time to $120 million in new multifamily rental housing.
So that's really what's left on the table right now. It's not just $10 million being cut, but there's a whole lot of money being left on the table. And I'm curious as to two people, Roy Diamond and Ron Salem, who seem to be so adamant about this. I know that Salem has been telling everybody who will listen that he's going to run against Deegan for mayor. And we hear that Roy wants to run for Congress. What do you think is their motivation for doing this? Is it just their idea of fiscal responsibility, or is it political irresponsibility?
So I haven't heard Ron directly say to me, whenever I've raised the question of what his political future is, it's always been he's interested in serving after his current term ends on council. He sort of dances around the idea of he's going to run for mayor or not. But it's interesting if he is talking to others about potentially running for mayor. It could be that, we would position him in a way saying, politically, the city council can say, look, we kept this mayor in check from spending all this money. So maybe there's some political aspect to that. On the other side of it, there are some concerns council members have about future deficits, about having the ability to handle a future slowdown in taxes. And, the collective bargaining agreements that were agreed to by the Deegan administration are going to add some cost to the city in the next couple of years. It's like the combination of pay raises and higher starting salary. It's going to be about $50 million more in cost for the budget this next year. Then you add another $25 million on top of that 50 the following year. Then another $25 million on top of that the third year. So I mean that's a big chunk of money, and so they're kind of looking at that and going, well, that's going to squeeze out some of the funding that we would have for some of these programs. But
are they taking into consideration the revenue that would be generated from all of the new housing that is being built and all of the property that's being developed? I mean, all of that's going to be paying, ad valorem taxes on that property, and that's going to be revenue that they don't have now, but will be because of the new construction.
Yeah, my understanding, David, is that loan program which is a loan is, and I think Mike Tolbert talked about it a couple weeks ago. We're looking at like 35,000 possibly new housing units out there. I mean, down the road. I mean, to what Mike Miller just said, ad valorem sounds like partisan politics for my Republican colleagues.
Yeah, obviously I cover City Hall, and I've not heard anybody say outright, this helps us politically, and they're not going to say that. There is a question of, is there a line to be drawn on how much you take out of reserves? I mean, if the mayor came in and said, I want to take $100 million out of reserves, is that too much? What is the right amount? What should the policy be of drawing down money out of the reserves? like I said, in the past, it's been about, average of $9 million a year. It's come out of reserves. And then they know at the end of the year, they're going to end up being able to replenish that because they always end up spending less than what they bring in. Mm-hmm. And you talk about $47 million. Well, that's a pretty big change in policy. And if that's something that the city council agreed to do, then that would have some ramifications down the road. But on the, and like I say, there's still, I'm almost sure of it, there is still going to be some legislation at some point brought forward by the administration if they're not able to get the $10 million as part of the budget. And there will be a big debate and discussion over that at that point.
My memory about reserves goes way back. And somebody correct me if I'm wrong about this, but when John Payton became mayor in 2002, I think it was, he brought Walt Basile over. Walt was the head of JEA for years, and he brought Walt over, and Walt recommended to John, because of money issues, that they use some reserves. They invest some reserves and spend reserves. And people went absolutely crazy about it. I don't know I can't remember what the outcome of that was. But reserves have always been the hot item with every council I've ever been around, and this is no different.
Yeah, and there's emergency reserves which are set aside and you can't touch it. That's just, it's there. It's definitely there if there's a hurricane or something.
That's in excess of $125 million, correct?
I believe that's right, Mike, in terms of the amount of money that's in reserves. Politically, you have a city council that's Republican controlled. I don't think that they perhaps have the same sort of policy agreement with the mayor in terms of how much city tax dollars should go into affordable housing and homelessness. Perhaps if Ron Salem we're running for mayor, he can look back and say, look, I took a stand and stopped some of the spending from going out of control. And maybe there's a political benefit to that. The affordable housing would be one of those cases where it is public-private partnership and it brings a lot of nonprofit money to the table, which is really leveraging tax dollars, which is, on the other hand, what city council members always say they want to see done with affordable housing.
One of the issues that has really deterred downtown from growing and enhancing has been the crime that's been affiliated with the homeless center. And if you go back to John Delaney, when we put in the new library, which unfortunately has become daycare for the homeless, the new library downtown. When you're talking about a quality of life and you're talking about those issues that we want downtown to grow or we want young people to be there, the homeless issue is an issue that is tied to so much of it. So to me, is it fiscal responsibility or is it just, to me, it is nitpicking, but if we're talking long term, it's about a quality of life and where our city wants to be. And one of the issues that is throughout our community is homelessness, because it's affecting downtown and the growth of downtown, and affordable housing. And so if somebody's going to run, are they going to say, well, I stopped that from happening, or when I win, I'm going to do something about it? But then the question is, why the hell didn't you do something about it when you were in charge of the money? Which, if I was not a Deegan, I'd be saying that if somebody runs against me.
As my colleagues know, homelessness is one of the few issues that I really dig into because it is so visible. We are seeing Citizens Property Insurance Company possibly moving out of downtown, and they're blaming it on the homeless and the threats against their employees. But, and I've read through the mayor's 12-point plan, and I hope at some point we're going to be able to talk about that in depth here on the show. But I still walk away and say, but do you have a solution for the homeless? We're putting plans together, but when you take a look at this, I don't want to be oversimplifying things, but keep in mind that you go to, a Sulzbacher Center for breakfast, then they tell the people you got to leave because we've got to get ready for your lunch or for your dinner or whatever. So these people don't just stay there, and they don't have a gymnasium to go to, and they don't have a workout room to go to. they're told they've got to leave. And where do they go? Wherever you can find yourself a place to go. Then they come back for another meal or to spend the night. But it's those hours from 7 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning until 5 o'clock in the afternoon where they're most visible downtown, where they interact, unfortunately, with those who are working and have a legitimate reason. Not that they don't have a legitimate reason, but they've got a working reason for being down there. And even with affirmative action, and not affordable housing, I mean, like I said, I don't want to get too deep in this thing, but affordable to a homeless person means zero because they can't afford even a reduced rent, even $400 or $500 a month if they don't have jobs and they're not able to sustain themselves, on the street now. What good is it going to be when we come up with more programs until we can find a place for people to go during the day so that they feel like they've got a life to live and not have to be on the streets during the day? Does that make any sense at all? Probably not, but I tried.
Yeah, no, it does, Mike, in terms of what they're trying to look at doing. And how do you actually reach the really hardcore homeless population?
Yep.
And again, this is still going to be not resolved completely by this particular budget. I think there's going to be continued legislation and look at continued appropriations for that program. So I think it's to be continued in terms of that particular aspect of really tackling that issue.
One of the things in this budget, my understanding, is Mr. Diamond, Mr. Salem, and Mr. Friedman decided one of the ways that they were going to balance the budget was by cutting Mike Weinstein's budget, his salary. If I understand, Mike Weinstein is probably one of the most experienced and has probably one of the longest track records of people who understand finance. He goes back to Ed Austin's days when he was the state attorney. Then he was there with John Delaney. He also was, if I remember, the coordinator for our Super Bowl, and we made money on this, and now he's come in. So, here is a guy who understands finance probably better than anyone else. And so here are these three dudes who want to cut the one person that understands finance, which says to me, my observation is, if you get rid of the guy who understands how finance works, then maybe this administration will have a tough time for the next 2 or 3 years until they go into election. That's my observation. But, if you go back and look at the salaries that Curry was paying his folks, and then you look at this, I think some people have got their priorities wrong, and it just smacks of partisan petty politics from my perspective.
Where does that stand now, David? What is the status of that attempt to get rid of Weinstein's salary?
Yeah, so it failed in the Finance Committee, so I don't think there's going to be an amendment that could possibly give support from the full city council. So I think that's been kind of considered and disposed of through the committee process. There is still this continuing debate on the position of the mayor's office, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, I think it is, that Harbaz Ahmed holds, where they said we're going to zero out funding for that position. And there still will be that's still something that has to be resolved and decided upon one way or the other, I think, for the budget.
What I kind of wonder about, getting back to Weinstein for a moment, Mike Hightower, is if you were going to try to target the mayor because of political, considerations, why are you going after that top Republican that's in her administration? I mean, Mike Weinstein's a Republican. He always has been a Republican. When I worked for him at the JEDC, he was a Republican. So why go after the Republican who's got such a high position in this Democratic administration? Why aren't you going after perhaps one of the Democrats that are working for the mayor?
Because you're Roy Diamond, and you see an easy target to get a headline. It's as simple as that.
And since Rory has inflated his resume and he can't sing, and he's terribly disingenuous, I don't think we should expect anything else from Rory Diamond. If I could just ask on this budget thing, real quick, David. Again, I'm 500 miles away, but I get this rumor that they're that there are members of the council who are looking at ways to backpedal a little bit on the $56 million for the parks, which was part of the negotiation the mayor did with the Jaguars, which was a key component. And now I hear that behind the scenes that they're tinkering with that. Am I correct?
Yeah, there's been some discussion. This is all part of that community benefits agreement, which has been fluid, and who knows how that's going to finally end up. But I think they wanted to take a closer look at why the cost of these 3 riverfront parks have gone so much higher above what anybody had previously said they were going to do cost. So, but I think basically that community benefits agreement is going to have the $56 million for the parks. It is going to have $94 million on top of that for East Side neighborhood, for county-wide initiatives in workforce housing and in workforce development and homelessness, and $14 million for parks countywide. So I think that's been really resolved, Mike, in terms of that particular portion of it. Now, there's some additional funding above and beyond that for parks that they have been looked at cutting out of the 5-year capital improvements program, and that did get cut. Okay. But with the administration's support, they said, yeah, we think we can do without this $20 million for Met Park and for the Shipyards West Park.
So on the CBA, so you really believe that at the end of the day, we're going to be able to go back to the Jaguars and get their, if we put in our 150, we'll get 150 from them?
That's what it looks like right now, because the big issue was, how quickly would the city need to commit to spend its portion of it? Sounds like they reached agreement with the Jaguars on how to do that. But, as we speak now, it still hasn't been approved by city council. There's still moving pieces. There's still going to be some council members who say, oh, well, we now know what the collective bargaining agreements are going to cost for police and firefighters. We've got to take another look at this community benefits agreement. We can't afford all of it.
Well, it never gets easy, folks. It just never gets easy. Listen, we're out of time, but so grateful that you came back with us once again. Thank you so much, David.
Of course.
It's always good to have you here. And we're not done yet with this thing. This has still got a couple more weeks before it needs to get completely passed, so we'll see what happens. And we want to thank you all for joining us as well, and of course remind you that we keep the cameras rolling and the lights on thanks to our friends at the Jacksonville Historical Society, Alan Bliss, and the wonderful donors who have helped in keeping this show running. And we thank you very, very much for your support and hope you will continue to support us as we go through this year. And that's going to do it for all of us. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you once again next week.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Tolbert, Mike Hightower, and Mike Miller can be found on your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit the website at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversation with Mike's on Mike.